Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, Kat Newport. Kat Newport, ACC, CCP, author of Smart Conflict, Turning Disputes into Growth Opportunities, and founder of Oculus, Inc., is a dynamic force in conflict coaching and personal awareness. With a fervent commitment to using conflict as a catalyst for growth and innovation, Kat empowers individuals and organizations to thrive. Through Oculus, Inc., Kat provides a transformative journey, individually coaching leaders and shaping comprehensive programs that leave a lasting positive impact on individuals and organizations. Kat, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Marc.
So today we're going to discuss how to proactively mitigate conflict when estate planning. Now, Kat, you came to me with this topic, which stems from the work you do with a client of yours, an estate planner.
Correct.
And in that role, you're the go-to partner when individuals, families bump up against conflicts surrounding planning or executing their estates. I'm excited to discuss your expertise and experience, bringing a lot of value, definitely, to our listeners today.
So excited to be here.
Great. So first, let's discuss sources of conflict. What are some of the common conflict areas you've been asked to assist with during the estate planning process?
Where do I start? There's so many. So I think one of the first ones out of the gate would be complex family dynamics. We're no longer in the stage of the nuclear family where it's one spouse, a couple of kids, and we call it a day. We can have multiple spouses at this point. We have blended families. We have extended families. We have, informally adopted children. So we have all these complex relationships intertwining with one another. And when a loved one has passed away or is looking at building up their estate or planning out their estate in preparations for the future, these relationships, which may have been informal or never really discussed, all start to come into a little bit of sharper relief. People have assumptions, and those assumptions may not be shared, and we can start seeing that friction come up in relationship.
Do you get involved more commonly? Do you see the conflicts arise during the estate planning process or after someone passes away and kind of all chaos breaks out?
I'm usually invited into the room when the conflagration is already going. So when everything's already sparked up. I'm a big believer in proactivity, about relationship management in advance, open communication, but usually someone with my skill set, so mediators or conflict coaches, the lawyers, usually end up coming in when the relationships have already broken down and we do have to tidy up a few things.
So I guess you're usually engaged by the family or by the by the attorney who's like probating or administering the estate, or both?
It depends on when the invitation comes. So the estate can bring me in if there's a particularly sticky sort of situation going on that the executor is struggling with. The executor themselves can bring me in. Executorship can be quite trying. You're not only trying to deal with all the legal stuff and adhering to the wishes of the loved one, but you're managing those relationships through a period of transition and grief, which can be very difficult to do, particularly if you're grieving yourself. So the executor themselves can call me in for that additional support. Before we get to the legal side of it, the lawyers may recommend mediation. So I can get called in from that side of the house as well. So there's a few vectors I can enter the situation.
And maybe can you just walk us through like an example of thing you would get called in for, and then what's the approach that you take to kind of resolve the conflict that arises?
For sure. So there's two main ways that I'll come into a conflict through an estate and I'll address it. The first is through mediation. So this is where two or more parties have agreed to voluntarily come into a room and discuss the sticking point. For example, it might be a piece of property or who takes over the business after the loved one passes on. But this is a voluntary process where both individuals or both groups of folks come into the situation mediation with an eye to moving forwards. What are we going to do, seeing that we're on, two different wavelengths on what we think should happen? So this is a facilitated discussion where we explore both parties' perspectives. And if there's more than two parties, that's of course going to be exploring everybody's perspective, and it gets a little more complicated. So we end up exploring those perspectives. We start exploring what everybody wants the outcome to look like, how everybody's comfortable moving forward, and we focus on the relationships. When we're dealing with estates, when we're dealing with grief, this is a transitory phase, right? So we might get stuck in this grief in the moment, but 5 years down the line, when you're at the family reunion, what do you want that relationship to look like? So it's definitely relationship focused. So mediation is one part, when both parties agree to come to the table. If both parties don't agree, or they're just not quite yet ready to agree, we can move into what's called conflict coaching. This is where I meet one-on-one with a party, be that a couple, be that a family, a splinter of the family group, and we talk about their perspectives. We talk about what they see happening, what they want to happen, what's their drop dead points. I cannot go beyond this point. I want to have a great relationship with my sister after this is over. So we start unpacking some of those internal narratives that are surrounding conflict, and we all have them. I mean, we've been gathering, narratives on conflict since we first drew breath, be it for good or for ill. Whatever. So we start unpacking those kinds of things so that when we do get into that estate management, or we do eventually get to mediation where we actually sit down and talk with the other folks, we're ready to have that conversation. We have the mindset in place of this is where I want to go.
So that's usually the start, right? You kind of either are doing mediation or you're working one side or the other. All just within the realm of trying to get to that end point, because I guess there's so many dynamics involved in it, right? There's like you mentioned, trying to keep the relationship that they may want. I imagine in some cases they may say they don't even care about the relationship, but then there's also I guess is the reason why this conflict's erupting is because like the estate plan didn't define kind of some of these things, or is it even though it was defined, you're still getting involved and there's still conflict in it?
There are many reasons why. That is definitely one. And two, so if the relationship with the loved one who's passed on was rocky to start with, or the communication wasn't present before the loved one passed on, this can cause a lot of gray areas. Well, grandma promised me the china. No, grandma promised me the china. So there wasn't that communication in the beginning. We also have everybody's relationship with the loved one who's passed on. And whatever state that relationship was in at the moment of passing is what we kind of have to work with and we kind of work through. So if you had conflicts with the past loved one, or they passed on and they weren't rectified, or they weren't brought to some sort of resolution where you could feel comfortable with moving on from that point, you've got to deal with that now on your own. And family plus money plus high emotion, you're knee deep in conflict just right out of the gate. So there's very many dynamics coming into play here. I mean, a second wife who's battling with a first wife, or the new spouse who we haven't quite married yet, and then the ex-spouse, and just all of these relationship dynamics and expectations of entitlement. What I deserve from this individual? Well, I took care of mom the last 5 years she was alive, and you didn't do anything. So there's a whole myriad of things that come into play here. I mean, right down to even how did the loved one pass? I mean, if this was a long, drawn-out illness, everybody has that opportunity to start putting things in a row, start taking a look at that relationship and how you want to see that relationship end. However, if it was a sudden passing, an accident or some such, you're stuck with exactly what it was the last time you had a relationship with this individual. There's no opportunity for closure. So you've got that jarring point. Well, how do I resolve myself with them and resolve myself with my family and move through the estate management process that can take 18 to 24 months and. So yeah, it can be very complicated.
Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking there's probably no one I can think of that is sitting there thinking, All right, when I pass away, I want there to be conflict and problems and chaos. So what can someone do, or what should someone think about or do as part of the estate planning process to minimize the amount of conflict that happens after they do pass away?
That is an excellent question. The first word that comes to mind for me is communication. Please talk with your family. Please let them know what you want. Please let them know why you're thinking this. Please let them know why it's important to you to do it this way. Number 2, when communicating, try to be positive. I'm not going to put you in my will, Mark, because you made me angry today. Okay, that's not the communication I'm talking about. It's not a bludgeon to make people capitulate here. It's not a bludgeon to make people do what you want them to do. On top of the communication, you're also going to want to take a look at family changes. So if you've had your will done for a few years, there's been some births in the families, there's been some passings in the families, new marriages, all of this can affect how you want your estate to be managed as you move forward. So make sure you're keeping that will up to date. Make sure you're keeping your wishes up to date. And finally, I think that another big one here is that living will, or that healthcare directive. What happens when you can't make your own decisions, or if you can't make your own decisions as you approach the transition point, as you approach the end of your life? Making sure that those directions are known well in advance to as many folks as you feel comfortable, your sisters, your spouse, your children, to make sure that when those decisions have to be made for you, that everybody's on the same page. It's going to help reduce that conflict.
Communication can mean a lot of things. Is it verbal communication, or are you suggesting that they just document everything in their will or in some kind of side document? Or is it just communicating each thing to the parties involved? Is that enough, you think?
Documentation is super important, but the documentation also has to match what you've told people. If I've told you you're going to get my house, but then I will it to your brother,
that could be a problem.
We might have an issue. So making sure what you're telling folks and how you're managing that relationship is as transparent as it can be. This means, Mark, I'm not gonna give you the house. I'm gonna give it to your brother, and this is why. Is vitally important. You don't want, that surprise to come out when everybody finally gets eyes on the will, going, no, Kat promised it to me. What's going on? So this is about relationship management and facing the conflicts before you pass on. And a lot of us are conflict avoidance. We get that icky feeling in our stomach whenever we think, I'm going to have a really difficult conversation with my grandson and I really don't want to have it. So we avoid it altogether until, the lawyer shares the will and I'm gone and I don't have to deal with it anymore. This is prime space for conflict to erupt once you're gone, between the grandchildren, between the children, whomever.
When you get involved after the fact and conflict arises, how do you mitigate something like that where the will says this, but then there's conflict? Do you just say, all right, the will says this, or is there some kind of negotiation, mediation, or that you do, and obviously it depends on the situation, but is there times where you go against whatever the will or some kind of legal document states?
Also a very good question. As a mediator, I give no advice. I help you communicate. That is my job. What you choose to do at the end of that is entirely on you. So what I will do is I will bring the two parties into a room, and each party will express to the other in a respectful kind of way, because we do have some ground rules, in a respectful kind of way, what has been said, what they want, how they feel, what they think, how this is impacting them. This entire process is based on empathy. I want you to see me, which a lot of us don't get. So mediation facilitates that ability to communicate your reality. It facilitates active listening on the other part, on the other party's part, which can be very difficult, especially when you're upset and you have your own perspective. It's very hard to listen to the other person's point of view. And giving both parties an equal chance to express that. Giving both parties a chance to express precisely what the issue is. It's very interesting that a lot of folks walk into conflict not quite knowing what they're upset about. I come in and I'm talking about, grandma's necklace when I'm really upset that I want to feel special I wanted to feel recognized too. You were the favorite grandchild, but I want to feel special too. I'm not fighting over the necklace. I'm fighting over the feeling. So bringing out that information and figuring out how we want to move forward, that, okay, the necklace, it's off the table. Grandma gave it to your cousin. How do you want to move forward with your cousins from here? What's going to give you that recognition? Do you want to read the eulogy? Do you want to, how do you want to work through that? What is it that will make this relationship work moving forwards? Does that help? Did I answer the question?
Yeah. How do you know, as you go through mediation, how do you know that, okay, this mediation was a success, or maybe it wasn't? Are there how do you know that there was progress made, or that you got to the end and you were able to add some help to the conflict?
So as you move through the mediation, it's almost like a bell curve. When you first come in, everybody's really, the neckties are on and everybody's chilling. Then you get this emotional ramp up. This is my reality. Until it finally apexes, it will come to, okay, everybody's had their opportunity to speak. Now let's figure this out. And as you come down into figuring it out, it's about both parties coming together and being able to put down on paper and say, yes, I can agree to that. That makes me feel comfortable. No, I can't agree to that. We are not doing that, but I can agree to that. So as mediation goes on, depending on what mediator you use, but I love flip charts. That way everybody can see what's being written down, that we're going to agree that, cousin number one gets the necklace, but cousin number two, you're going to read the eulogy at the celebration of life event in 3 months' time. And this is going to make you feel recognized. So we gradually tease out what we can do to move forward. So we actually have a written document at the end of it that, yes, we have mutually and voluntarily agreed that these are the things that we want to do. Does every mediation work? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But that's up to them to decide, not me.
Yeah.
As a mediator, my job is to facilitate that conversation, to make the space, and to record the things as they come out and get everybody to see the other side's perspective.
Going back to the, planning part of this, or the estate planning part of this, as let's say the conflict arises after the person passes away, you're involved. What are the red flags, or I guess I'll call them red flags, that you look at and you say, well, if they would have done this in the estate planning process, we wouldn't be here right now. I know you talked about communicating, but are there any other specific ones that you can think of that someone, because that's where I get involved a lot in the estate planning process. And, obviously the more that someone, because, you mentioned communication, but I'm sure there's a lot of instances where they don't even know what to, they're not sure what do they need to communicate. Is there the same way you have a list on the mediation side? Is there like a list that you've seen, or checklist of, all right, make sure you go through these specific things as part of the estate planning process to make sure to lessen the chance of conflict down the road?
I don't have a specific checklist, but I do have experience. So we'll call it a mental checklist. Making sure you have a list. What do you have? And number two, get it assessed. So if you have a collection of art, make sure that collection of art is assessed beforehand. If you have property, make sure that the real estate agent has come in beforehand and say, okay, it's worth about this. So making sure that that's already been done in advance. This is also going to shorten a little bit that estate management piece after the loved one passes away. You don't have to wait for the real estate agent to come in. You don't have to wait for the assessors to come in. So these are two of the big ones.
And how granular do you go in terms of assessing things, right? Obviously there's big things like a house and maybe jewelry or stuff like that, but do you go all the way down to everything that they own?
I wouldn't go that far. The ring you've been wearing, that's sterling silver that you bought for $5, but has more sentimental value. You're not going to get an appraiser in for that kind of thing. So this then comes into, well, Sally, do you want that? Or Henrietta, do you want that? So we're back into that communication piece as well. The big ticket items are the ones you want those assessors to come in on, and the high emotional pieces are the ones you want to have those conversations about, either directly one-on-one if your relationship's good enough, potentially with a therapist if you need to go that direction, or a mediator, which are two different things, or a mediator if you need someone to facilitate that conversation.
What about the tips or ideas for the person who just doesn't want to think about passing away and just kind of pushes all this aside and says, I'm not going to deal with this because I don't want to face it or to deal with it. How or who should best get that person on board? Is it the children? Is it, some kind of advisor that the person has? But who would be involved in kind of, I don't want to say pushing, but kind of trying to help motivate that person to really look at this stuff during estate planning?
So from my coach's brain, when you say something like that, and I really don't want to face it, there's a lot of emotion that goes behind that. So it's about talking about why do we not want to face it? What is the empathy you can show your loved one right now that can help them move through the fear, the anxiety, the anger that goes along with the potential of them passing away? How can you support them through that journey to take a look at it? It's not about, gee, Dad, you really should, fill out your will, because you're going to leave us in a lurch. That's not coming from a place of empathy. It might be, but it's maybe not couched the best possible way. Again, Dad, what can I do for you? What's the concern here? If I was speaking on the flip side to the individual who has yet not planned their estate, this is the final act of love. This is the final act of love that you can give your family so that when they are grieving the hardest, when it is so fresh and new and raw, that they don't have to worry because they knew and they know that you love them enough to take care of it for them first. And acting from the place of love as opposed to the place of fear, the place of anger that my life is coming to an end, I think can change the narrative a little bit. Just reframing it that I love you enough that I'm going to make sure that I've done everything possible to make this as easy as possible for you as we move forward, or as you move forward.
Yeah. And I think, like we discussed, I don't think anyone sets out to have conflict. That there's, I'm sure it's the opposite. And if they kind of approach it that way, I think that is motivating, to go through with some of this estate planning. That can definitely help. All right, Kat, that's all the questions I have for you today. I want to thank you for being on the show. It was great hearing from you on this topic. Not only have our listeners gotten a lot out of it, but so have I, which, like I said, as an advisor, I come across estate planning, projects a lot. How best can someone learn more about what you do, and how best can someone reach out to you?
The best way to get a hold of me and reach out to me is through my website, which is www.smartconflictbook.com. And all the details are there, all my articles and blogs and all that good stuff.
Great. We'll link to that in the show notes. Thanks again, Kat, and thank you to everyone who tuned in today.
Thank you for having me.
Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.